You are listening to Words Off the Street, a discussion with police, fire, and EMS writers. We bring you their take on your world. Stay tuned for your host, BJ Schneider.
You are listening to episode 1.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of Words Off the Street. This podcast is designed to highlight and bring attention to those great people in public service, police, fire, EMS, first responders, that have stepped over into the world of writing, whether it be blog posts, fictions, whether they're writing the latest textbook. This way we can get them recognition, talk about their craft, and see what they have coming up in the world. I wanted to take a minute here on this episode to tell you where you can find us. You can always look at wordsoffthestreet.com. That is going to be the main website for this podcast. It'll also be where you can find all the show notes and links to all of our guests. On Facebook, you can find us at Words Off the Street, as well as Instagram at Words Off the Street also. On Twitter, we're Street Words Cast. Come on, don't be bashful. Come on and give us a shout on Twitter sometimes. Last but not least, you can find us at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us questions, messages, people you'd like to see interviewed, and I promise I will get back to you on all of those. So thanks for listening, and stay tuned for a great show. Today's show is brought to you by Zephos Books, Training and Public Speaking. Zephos Books is responsible for my short story collection, Welcome to New Orleans, How Many Shots Did You Hear? And Volume 2, Welcome to New Orleans, The Life You Save May Take Your Own. These collections are true stories from my years as a cop and a medic in the Big Easy. Zepho is also the publisher of my adventure fiction, A Salty Life and a Trader's Death. This is a tale of a modern-day smuggler and pirate caught in the middle of a fight for gold on the high seas. These books can be found on my website at zephosbooks.net, as well as all your favorite ebook outlets. Zephos Book also does trainings in areas such as tactical medicine, safety, and arranges for public speaking at your function. So go to www.zephosbooks, that's Xiphoos books.net, sign up for our newsletter, or visit the Facebook page and follow and get the latest news and releases. Now it's time to talk about those books or writings that are new, noteworthy, or in the news. When putting together this segment, I look and see what the latest releases were, what's topping Amazon's list, and always trying to find out something that kind of piques my interest. Well, as I'm sitting here doing this with my son, Blade, we've come across one by Bernard Schaefer. Bernard Schaefer, author of Way of the Warrior, including numerous other books in multiple genres. We're going to try to get him on the show sometime. He has one out there called Your Daddy's a Police Officer, a children's story. It's a bedtime story for kids ages 1 to 9, talking about their father as a police officer. It's a great book. If you have kids and you have them in that age bracket, this is a great way to expose them and explain to them that job, that public safety job that you have. What do you think, Blade?
I think that's a great idea. I am 10, but I would enjoy listening to it.
Well, it's got his vote, folks, so check it out. Your Daddy's a Police Officer, a children's story by Bernard Schaefer. That's what's Code 3 in print. Welcome, everyone. Today's a very lucky day for me. I'm interviewing a good friend and fellow podcaster, Sam Bradley, a.k.a. McKenna Sinclair. She is the author of the Partner series, Odyssey of the Phoenix and Challenge of the Phoenix, which are currently out now, as well as noted podcaster for the Disaster Podcast. I have the pleasure of co-hosting from time to time, so I'm very happy to have her on the line with me now. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for agreeing to come on.
You bet. We talked a lot about this in New Orleans, and I thought it was a great project because there's a lot of EMS writers out there that we want to encourage. So I feel quite privileged to be your first interview.
Episode 1 of Words Off the Street. So let's get started the easy way here. Why don't I just let you tell us a little about yourself, your background in public safety, and how you got into writing?
Well, that's a long story. I'll try to keep short. I'm one of the actual EMS dinosaurs, which go back almost to the beginning of time. I started in a little mom and pop, actually starting to drive a wheelchair van, then became an EMT, then became a medic, all this in Southern California. Worked everything from fire department 911 contracts to critical care transports. And in LA County, it was actually a good thing to be a EMT or a medic back there. This was kind of one of the original one-on-one systems because LA County doesn't transport. So any EMT or paramedic that was involved in transport really had to anticipate the needs of the paramedic on the squad, and that was a really good training ground. Eventually became a field supervisor there, also worked part-time as an ER tech and an EMS educator. And then in the late 90s, AMR took over our company and asked me to move to Northern California. So I did. I worked as a clinical coordinator for them in 2 counties, field supervisor, continued EMS education. Eventually went to the state of California where I got involved in building some disaster services that they had the money to build at the time. And, I was already quite a disaster junkie, which is another part of myself. And I have been and currently are involved in a disaster medical assistance team. So that's kind of the quick version. How did I get involved in writing? I was really thinking about that. I've been writing, I think, as long as I can remember. But this is really going to date me. And a few people know this, but I actually worked as a costume girl right out of high school in the 3rd season of Star Trek. And I was a theater arts major at Long Beach State University and got very involved in all of that. And so I got very enamored of the show and the characters because I actually got to meet them and party with them. And so I started writing.
Just went up a notch in my book, by the way, Sam.
Well, I actually took one of the original scripts I still have, and if I had known you were interested, I'd have shown it to you because I had it with me to show some other people when we were in New Orleans. I still have a few. But anyway, I got involved with script writing at that point. And, of course, they weren't going to go anywhere, but that kind of really started me. A lot of people start with what they call fan fiction, which is taking characters that are already created and weaving stories around them. So it's kind of a good way to start if you're totally unfamiliar with writing, and then you can kind of work your way into your own stories. And that's what I eventually did. My first stories actually were kind of like, we didn't have, internet so much back then, so we didn't have blogs, but we had just diaries of different runs that we would have and different characters that we met and patients that we met. And those was the beginning of what ended up being the trilogy.
Pretty cool. And you're definitely a benefit to the show in the sense that one of the things that we're trying to want to make our mark is that it's about public safety. I've worked as a medic and a police officer over the years, so I touched 2 of those, and you're a twofer as well, working very closely with the firefighters and being a medic also. So you've touched on both of those worlds, and it's real important because I think you have a good visual of what happens in both the worlds. How did public safety and writing come together for you? Your characters in both your current books are obviously firefighters. Obviously a natural progression, but tell us a little about that.
Well, because I worked in, like you mentioned, even though I mostly worked in private ambulance, I was very closely aligned with fire departments from those initial days in LA County to actually working at one contract where I actually worked out of a firehouse for 5 years. And I currently have a contract with the fire department that I've had for like 20 some odd years. So I've been very closely aligned. I've actually worked for a fire department for 2.5 years prior to moving here to Colorado. So I've had a lot of exposure to different people. And I want to ask you a question, BJ, on this, because when you say public safety, people automatically think about fire and police. So I hope that you would clarify that if someone is an ambulance person and is interested in writing, that we're not we're including them as well.
Good point. I'm very serious about public safety in all avenues. The first responders, the people who are out there on those street corners, no matter what the event is. I mean, I'm even a big believer that there's some great volunteer groups that are very much part of that public safety networking system. You worked with firefighters and some of this disaster stuff up in different places, and we've talked about it on your show. A lot of volunteers become part of these rescues, these firefighting efforts, and without them, we wouldn't have the systems that we have. So anybody who does any sort of assistance in that public realm, I feel very important. Obviously, we see a lot of police officers who have moved into it and firefighters who have written. We know of a few medics in our circle who are also doing that as well. So it becomes a great connection to see where everybody takes it and where they learn from it. And also, not just that, one of the things that I was discussing earlier is one of my favorite authors is Michael Connelly. Now, he has never done any time as a public servant in any of the realms, but he was a reporter, and probably his most noteworthy character is a California homicide detective. So knowing that he is able to get that character right is kind of really important to those of us who wore the badge. It's kind of nice to read a character who you can believe in, and I find that a big push to what we're looking at here.
You're right, and that's one of the main points I was going to make, is making your characters believable so that people not in the business can learn to understand them, but the people within the business will find them credible.
Exactly. So tell us about your current works, the books that you have out there, and what we have coming up.
Oh, lots of stuff. I've done nonfiction for quite a while, working on EMS textbooks, EMS management textbooks. I just finished one on community paramedicine. We're looking at one potentially for a wilderness first responder. And I've done personal experiences like my Ground Zero experience. So those are kind of an ongoing thing. And the good thing is they pay me for that. So, it helps it keeps the lights on, But my fiction work, actually, the first book goes back. I'm too embarrassed to say how many years. It's just evolved over time and became so long it developed into this trilogy. But it is about paramedic firefighters. But I include EMS people and certainly ER people and the relationships that develop between them and the relationships that develop between the three firefighter paramedics. Now, it's a little odd that there's three of them, but it kind of works out for the story as it happens. It started out more as a romance, but it even though it doesn't break any romance rules, of which there are many, it's, Jamie calls it, our friend Jamie Davis calls it a medical thriller. And that's how it came up on Amazon. So it's a lot more than just a romance.
I would agree. I mean, from the reading of your work that I've done, I find it crosses genres, and I think that's a good thing because you're able to expand your reader base. I mean, I am not in any way, sense, or form a big romantic book reader. Sorry, ladies. But
you're a guy. It happens.
Yeah, but when you read your story, it doesn't read like Lady Chatterley. It reads like an honest to goodness relationship, things that you have going on and other aspects of it, and there's a lot of action and things that are happening. So I think it's a well-rounded story.
Well, here's another secret about me. People can say, oh, well, how many firefighters or paramedics or EMTs are going to marry their partner? I'm raising my hand. I did that.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that. I know that your current wife is an EMS, but I didn't know that's how that situation evolved. So it happens. I mean, especially when you're working 24-hour shifts with somebody, you get to know them really well. So, that is a completely credible option. But, getting back to the subject of genre, I was really, before indie publishing became more common, when I was looking at, the only option of print publishing was the whole genre thing was a big deal. I mean, you couldn't cross the boundaries from one to the other. Well, nobody will want your book if it's a mix of all these different things. So that's one of the things, and I didn't think about it till just now, but one of the things that really pushed me off from trying to publish it, because I wanted the story to be what I wanted the story to be. And
you didn't want to get locked into.
I didn't want to get locked in. And then when I started kind of making it a romance, I realized it didn't fit that formula. And it's like, you know what? It's my story. It's going to be what it's going to be. And when we finally got to where you could self-publish things, I chose, even though I had a print publisher interested, I chose that route because then the story could be what I wanted it to be. And I could have the cover I wanted it to have and all of that. And I know you understand that.
Exactly. And I really think that being an independent author, an indie publisher, and the event of e-books that are out there has changed what we do so much in writing because we're not locked into that particular shelf in the bookstore that has a little heading on top that says romance, that says action, that says mystery, and if they don't know which shelf to put your book on, they don't take it. Nowadays, I think that it's evolved greatly with the ability to search things online and be able to have multiple topics. I think that really broadens the story base.
Well, here's a good example of that. And I think, was it 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, I was asked to contribute to an anthology about healthcare workers at the scene of disaster. And it was a great book. It was nonfiction, but it was people's personal stories. It ended up at Barnes & Noble in with the nonfiction stuff. So nobody would ever see it it was nonfiction, but it wasn't a textbook. It wasn't anything. So it ended up in a place that nobody ever saw it, unfortunately. So that's what I think about when you bring up your point. And that's a problem with actual bookstores, is you don't have any control over that.
Yeah, it's funny. My books that are out there that are in paperback in certain bookstores get easily lost in the shuffle because they may be true stories, they may be considered nonfiction, but no one would ever consider my writing textbook, and they get kind of lost with best restaurants of New Orleans or whatever, and they get stuck on the shelf. So unless someone stumbles across it, you wouldn't have somebody in the right area looking at. And I find that the ebook sale, somebody can put in medic and funny, and my book would pop up fairly close to the top, and I hope they get exactly what they're looking for.
And that's the beauty of a search engine and Amazon and online retailers. You know, they can find you. I'd be walking around. I wouldn't even know where to find you in a bookstore. So really good point.
My goal is to end up with one in every genre before it's over, but we'll see what we can do.
Well, you write one book in every genre, and then you have it wired, right?
I am currently working in the fantasy sci-fi is where I'm currently working with the new book that I'm working on. So I can't stay still in one genre.
Yeah. Well, and I am really glad that in this day and age we can do that. Our story can be what we want it to be, and people can find it.
Well, let's change gears a little bit and talk about that, the process of writing. The stuff you have out is very good. You've obviously been working on it a while. So let me throw some, whether it be technical or background questions for you. How much research do you do? Obviously, our background and our training plays a lot into our characters. If your character's a medic or a cop or a firefighter, you have to understand the job to get it right. We have all seen those horrible characters that don't have any relationship to the real world, and I think that hurts them. So how much research do you do to get your characters right, to find things about them and the storyline?
Well, on that note, I want to preface this with the fact that I'm talking to all the people that might potentially want to write out there, and I realize anybody in EMS would know the difference, but I've known a lot of authors who are not in EMS that fortunately have asked my opinion on something medical. But there's nothing that makes me crazier than having an EMT doing paramedic skills. That makes me just want to throw the book against the wall because nobody did their homework on it. There's a lot of people that don't know the difference between an EMT and a paramedic. But when you're talking about what they're doing in a story, that's going to throw someone like us right out of the story. So just saying.
But as far as the nasal cannula on everyone on TV.
Yeah, we do. Well, and of course that's kind of older medicine these days too. But for the original books, it wasn't so much research, especially as far as, I train firefighters. So as far as fire level EMS, I know that very well in my own experience and stuff. Now, when it came to fighting fire, of which there are many fire scenes in the book, I had to lean on my firefighters for specific information on, well, how would you handle that? What kind of tool would you use? And what's a Halligan? And what do you do with it? And, to some extent, I learned that working with the fire department, but there were other things, hazmats and whatever, that I may not have as much knowledge on how they would handle it. And I really did want that to be accurate. Now, my character actually morphs from being a paramedic firefighter to doing other things. He eventually goes to medical school. Well, now I'm really out of my element. Fortunately, I have a lot of doctors that are friends, and they've given, including my cousin, and they've given me the whole rundown on how that all works and when they do their different levels of testing and so forth and so on, which the third book I'm working on right now is while he's going through that. Well, then he goes to work in an ER, and now that's, even though I worked as an ER tech, that's a whole different level of medicine, some of which I know about, some I don't. And the book following that one will actually get into international disaster work. That's just a concept right now, but that's something that's really going to involve some research.
It's a constant evolving thing, I think. As our characters grow, we have to grow as individuals as we learn new things. Well, that leads me to the next question. What's your spark when you have that new story? Like you said, you've got a concept for this international disaster as these characters move forward. Was that always a thought? Was there something that happened, something you read, something you saw happen that said, this needs to be woven into a full story?
If you want the honest truth, I got the idea from Jamie just the other night.
Well, that's an inspiration.
Because this guy has an imagination. Jamie Davis, look his stuff up. We'll give him a little shout out at the end here. But this guy's a fantasy writer. He makes stuff up. I mean, at least I write about real people in contemporary society. But everything, he has to make up his world. And fantasy writers...
Jamie Davis, the author of the Extreme EMS series, takes medics and puts them with the vampires and the werewolves. So if you don't think you can step out of that little box, he can definitely do it for you.
And it's fascinating and it's amusing, and he really makes it real. But to consider the type of imagination you have to create a world and then put people and situations in it, it's just amazing. So we're talking about my third book, which should be going up the beginning of December. And I said, God, I don't know where to take him after that. And so we started playing What If. He goes, well, what if? I said, well, maybe they can get involved in disaster work. Well, what if they go on an international disaster and then this happens and this happens and this happens? I'm going, oh, my God, that never occurred to me. But what a good idea. So I'm actually kind of going to take that idea and run with it. But, that's kind of a cool thing. Talk to other authors.
Well,
if you're
never
really
know where
stuck
the
on
spark's
something.
going to come from.
Exactly. Once it's there, it's easy to, then you get excited about it and you dig down and you go, okay, well, my first books were like, I could think of different scenarios and different scenes and different incidents that I had, been involved with in my life, which was a big water tower rescue thing. And I put that in the book because I thought it was an interesting situation that you don't run into every day. So to some extent, you have that out of your experience, but then you have other things that aren't. So that's kind of where your research comes in. But, once you get one of those situations, wow, this is really exciting. I have sat down, I don't know, you probably have too, BJ, but you can sit down and start writing in the morning, and the next thing you know, it feels like 10 minutes have gone by and it's 8 hours. You just get so immersed in what you're writing and you get so excited about it. But, sometimes getting that initial spark and figuring out what you're going to write, that's a great idea. Share with other people. Like Jamie did with me. The guy just has an imagination that's beyond comprehension. Or sitting down and talking to you, it's like, well, did you consider this? Or what about that? Just brainstorming.
Yeah, that's one of the stories that I have for a book later on in 2017. Just reading through old news articles of all things, and I came across a great historical article that had a lot to do with ships in the Gulf of Mexico, gold, pirates, all these great things, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is all a true story. And I'm like, we could add one little twist, and this is a whole book. So it was one of those things where you read the story and went, oh, I can't pass this up. I've got to start taking notes. So,
well, Jamie kind of gave me the same idea too. He says, write stories that are kind of in your own genre, where the story went in this direction, but you might say, well, what if it went over here? What if you could use the same concept, but kind of push it off in a different direction? So that's kind of the same thing.
How do you set up your writing? Do you write in the morning, the evenings? Do you have a special time, or is it whenever the muse strikes you?
That's something I'm particularly bad about. I don't have a real schedule, even though it's a lot easier for me than most people because I work at home most of the time. But early in the morning is when I'm probably at my creative best because my mind's fresher and so forth. And if I can sit my butt in the chair and write, I'm good. But then my mind goes to, okay, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to go there, got to feed the dog, got to, And if I say, okay, I'm going to do all this stuff, and then I'm going to sit down and write, by the time I get around to it, I'm tired. And I can't really get into it. So and I used to think that writing was kind of a privilege, that I could do that after I got all of my stuff done. And I got to get out of that mindset. writing is now my occupation. I've got to give it, like Jamie said to me, how much reading are you doing? I go, not nearly enough. He goes, that's just as important as doing the writing. So I've got to find time for all these things, and I've got to structure them into my day. That's probably my worst habit at the moment.
Well, that was a great interview with Sam Bradley. It was good to have her on the show. You'll be seeing a lot of her on and off as we do some different recordings. If you want to get in touch with Sam or learn more, she's at thesambradley@gmail.com, or you can find her at thedisasterpodcast.com, where she does her regular show. Her writings can be found at all your major digital outlets under McKenna Sinclair. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate dropping us a line here at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com. And we'll get back to you. I'll answer anything we can find out. So once again, thanks, Sam, and thanks all of you who are listening. I hope to bring you many more interesting and powerful interviews.